welcome to Worst Quality Crab, a podcast of Asian American stories and recipes from best quality hearts. I'm your host, Freesia. Joining me, as always, is my husband and producer, Sam.
Hello.
On this one, we have a very special guest. I can't even hide my excitement. I'm not even really going to try. Forgive me already, audience and guest. Joining us this episode is 2 times James Beard Award winner, creator of Icho Food, a super successful blog, and the author of Mooncakes and Milk Bread, and the author of upcoming cookbook, Chinese Enough, Kristina Cho.
Hey.
Hi, Kristina.
Hi. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're so happy you're here. I'm grinning, clearly.
I'm really excited. I know we're going to have a lot to talk about.
We do. So there's actually a lot of backstory to this one, and maybe this won't even make it into the episode.
Mm-hmm.
But you were a guest of The Dumpling Report with Margot about 1.5 years ago. Margot was our first guest on this show.
Amazing.
And I remember reading that one because we read them all, and I was like, she sounds great. She says all of the things that we talk about on this show. And someone separately sent it to me and they're like, you should get her on. And I was like, James Beard Award, if only, because we were like pretty new in our podcast. And now here we are. And so like that feels like a moment. And also Sam reminded me, so he does work with Margot to like set up the translation for some of her Dumpling Report stuff. He set up the one at Good Luck that you did.
Oh, amazing. Cool.
Yeah. So it all feels very
full circle.
Very full circle.
Amazing. I almost called one of my parents because I was like, I can't. my Cantonese is like not strong enough for me to like execute like, hey, we're going to be here. Like all I can do is order hagao and sumai essentially when I go to Good Luck. So
it's enough.
Yeah. All you really need.
All you need.
Speaking of enough, your new book is called Chinese Enough. I love it. I'm obsessed.
Thanks. I was really nervous about the title. When I was launching the cover and the title at the same time, I was really nervous about it because I wasn't sure how people would react to it. It's a very quiet but also powerful statement, just saying Chinese enough, you know? But it's been really cool now that it's been out there in the world and seeing how many people actually get it and hearing that it resonates with people.
What was your initial reservation?
So when I write my cookbooks, and I can say plural now that this is my second one, I often think about who I'm writing these books for. And in actuality, I'm writing them for everyone, but I'm definitely writing them for people who are like me, who might not see their food and their culture, aspects of their family and life represented in media in any way, you know? And so I was pretty confident that Chinese Enough would resonate with people who come from that like background. But I actually proposed the title to my agent at first. And I think it took her a little bit to like really understand it because for some reason, the word enough almost has a negative connotation. Like it's not enough. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. People can have so many different reactions to it. Like we like throw around, like, should it be like more than Chinese enough? But that also just sounds it doesn't have as good of a ring to it, you know? And again, I think just saying I am or you are Chinese enough or blank, whatever enough, again, is a quiet and powerful statement. And that you don't need to kind of like overcompensate to prove that you are who you are, you know? And I think that kind of speaks to the title of the book. And so that was my initial reservations about it. And I still get messages from people asking me to explain like, oh, why did you choose that? It doesn't make sense to me, you know? And I think that's just like going to be part of the experience of the book coming out and maybe just in general teaching people about what this experience is being, you know, especially when you're something plus American, Chinese American, Vietnamese American, anything, kind of always having to talk about it.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that so much. The thing that came up for me in the like, oh, enough is a little bit negative was the idea of like, this is not like a C- and you pass the class. This is like an A- and basically it's an A.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I've done it, you know, like I did a good job. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so interesting for me thinking about your relationship to the Chinese enoughness because you talk about this in the book a little bit, but like for me being half Chinese, I've always felt that like that's a no-brainer for me. And so I think I've said this a couple of times, but when I see people that look like you, look like Sam, full Asian, full Chinese, you grew up in a Chinese restaurant, to me, I'm like 110%. Clearly,
Yeah, I guess it is interesting and it is, I guess, relative, like exactly what you said. I obviously have had moments like throughout my entire life where people would just question my Asianness in general, whether or not it's culturally or even like also DNA based. Like my the summer after I graduated college, I did an internship in Beijing, and like everyone in the office just assumed that I was half Asian for whatever reason. They were used to getting interns from the United States, but like I might have been maybe their first like Asian American person in
Mm.
the office, and so a lot of them like, oh, like what else are you? And I'm like, nothing. Like like I am like Chinese, and like just during that summer, there were different times when like I went to Xi'an and I remember this group of maybe like teenage boys. I was like walking to lunch or something like that. And they like came up to me and they're like, hello. And like, we're practicing their English on me. And I think that was the first time I've ever really thought of or also heard about the phrase of like English speaking face, which is something that a lot of my coworkers had told me that I had, which
Oh.
I was like, I don't really know how I feel about that, but it was something that was like brought to my attention. And so I think that just again adds
Mm.
to like the complexity of what it feels like to be Chinese enough or to have other people think you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh my God. Part of why we do this show is because
Yeah.
the more that we talk to people, we're kind of realizing that like nobody feels enough of anything
Mhm,
in any
mhm,
way. Like I think we've had maybe 2 guests who have felt their ethnicity enough and their sisters. It's very wholesome.
mhm,
But no matter who we talk to, it sort of comes up in one way or another.
mhm,
And, to kind of bring this back to food into the book, like the thing that brings everyone back to their enoughness and their culture is food.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And to what you said, I was like, oh, it must be nice to not have any identity crisis, to to just like you like I am 1000% like this,
Mhm.
but I think that's just like not the case for a lot of people in the United States or even in other countries when there's a lot of big immigrant population because it's so multifaceted and like especially when it comes to food. Like growing up in my parents' house, we of course ate a lot of Chinese food, but we were also like I'm a child of like the 90s in the Midwest, and
Mhm.
so big part of my diet was like we like fast food and like a lot of like maybe uniquely Midwestern staples and stuff like that. So it would have been nearly impossible for me to have had like a 1000% airtight Chinese diet growing up,
Yeah.
So I think that kind of like snowballs as you like get older and like you have all these different preferences and just like again like figure out your cooking and your food style.
Yeah. I feel like that shows in Chinese enough.
Mhm.
There are actually a few recipes where like I read it first and I told Sam and I was like, she has a recipe for we call it pork hash, but like the steamed pork dish that you
Mhm.
have, that's like very quintessential Chinese, I think, to our families
Mhm.
too. But then
Mm.
you
Yeah.
have things where you're clearly like, this is actually my Midwestern influence, or this is like a take
Great.
on that.
Mhm.
And I love that so much because to your point, it still feels Chinese enough. And we've had conversations on this show about like, when does it stop being quote unquote authentic or traditional and like says who?
Yeah.
And I feel like you really kind of like answer that with this of like,
Yeah.
I'm Chinese, it's Chinese, it counts.
Yeah, when you boil it down, it is as simple as that. I think it's not like there is this almighty committee
Mhm.
that is deeming various foods Chinese or not Chinese. And maybe some things are like a little bit more sacrilegious than others,
Mm.
I guess. But I honestly think I can attribute the way that I cook and like my urge to kind of like be creative and take some liberties of recipes, honestly, to my parents, especially my mom. There is one recipe in there. You might have noticed it that's called mom's spaghetti.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And as I wrote this recipe, and I actually spoke to a lot of people while I was like kind of just researching and just, I don't know, I think just talking to other people was my way of researching and kind of understanding like more of cultural influences, because like for me, I spent so much of my life being like the only person other than like my cousins or my brother growing up in a place of only being Chinese. I got to just talk to a lot of other people.
Mhm.
And when I told them about my mom's spaghetti, how she created this when she was 12 years old and she was in Cleveland at the time. She'd been living in the United States for 6 years and she learned of spaghetti and she's like, I want to make this at home because I'm tired of eating Chinese food. And so she like went home and concocted this, which is just like regular spaghetti noodles. And then the sauce is ground beef with ketchup, oyster sauce, and like a hefty amount of white pepper for like a little bit of spice. Like there's no like tomatoes other than what is the trace amounts in ketchup, I guess. And she made this my entire childhood. I make it like quite frequently because it's something that I crave. So I think it's like part of my DNA now. But when I would tell other people about this recipe, they're like, oh, like my mom also kind of made this like crazy version of spaghetti that doesn't have tomatoes. Or then you hear about like Filipino spaghetti, like using like banana ketchup or something, like, and I think that kind of just speaks to the fact of like so many of us were just like alone for a long time and didn't have anyone else to share these like recipes and just memories with. And now, like that it's like in a book or even if you share it on social media, you get all these people that are like, I had a very similar dish too, or like my mom did that. And I think that's just really cool. And so, yeah, I guess to go back to it, like, I feel like I owe a lot to my mom for kind of giving me that freedom. She always kind of tweaked a lot of recipes to make do with what we had access to in the Cleveland suburbs.
I really love that because I think also what you just named is like she made something that was like American enough.
Yeah.
Like almost reverse.
American. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to think of like something that was like was like maybe a little bit more Asian would be, I think in the Bay Area is maybe where tomato beef chow mein was created, right? I think it was Brandon Ju who told me about that. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting because yeah, tomato beef. Like I think there's actually tomatoes in it, but they do often enhance it with like ketchup, and there's oyster sauce or soy sauce, and the noodles are crispy. And I'm like, those are all exactly the same flavor profiles that are in my mom's spaghetti, but just in a different font, essentially.
Yeah.
So that is also really interesting too. It's all a spectrum.
I love that because one, I love tomato beef chow mein, and I do feel like it is quintessential San Francisco. Like, didn't even occur to me until much later that like it was so specific to here, but I did sort of grow up with it like teens era. But also you mentioned that in the book, like in your mom's spaghetti in that little blurb, and it said tomato beef, and I was like, aw. And it was just one of many moments in Chinese enough that I did feel seen and I did feel represented because so much of your book is talking about specific noodles that we use and specific brands of coconut milk and things that I'm like, yep, we use that one. Or I can imagine the markets that you went to on Clement Street that we go to and the dim sum places and a lot of the stuff in mooncakes and milk bread that I was like, oh, I know Eastern Bakery. That is the spot. Just all kinds of things that what was really hitting with me, it was like, this is one of the few kind of food representations in like mainstream media that I can like really truly relate to and identify with. I would realize like I'm very old and I was like, I'm having this moment right now.
I would say you're not very old.
Okay, thank you. I feel very old. Thank you. But it was just, like I'm at this age where I'm finally feeling these like couple of moments of representation and thinking like, one, kind of sad for me, but like yay for other people.
Yeah.
That are going to get to see that and either A, like see themselves in it or B, have this window and invitation into discovering it.
Yeah.
There's no question in there. I just think it's really great.
No, I was going to say like, I'm really grateful that you have that take because it is something that I keep in mind in my writing. I think is to acknowledging who the audience is or potentially who the audience will be and making sure that certain people feel seen, And so I really appreciate that a lot. It's honestly interesting, like since I have been Cakes and Milk Bread out for a while and did a lot of events, I noticed that I have like a wide range of fans in terms of like age demographics. I really thought of it because you made a reference like I'm so old, but you're not. I think what you meant was saying that like even later in life, I'm only now realizing that there's bodies of work and things like that like represent me and see me, and like part of it is like a shame that it hasn't happened earlier, but now it is happening. And so I during my first book tour, like there was like people who were like my grandparents' age that were coming to my events and like asking me questions and stuff. And
Aw.
like, and then like, of course, getting younger and like closer to my age. And then there's like people's children who were using mooncakes and milk bread as like they would draw little doodles of like the photos of the buns in there and stuff like that.
Aw.
And like it was like their favorite like bedtime story. And like, I don't know Chinese enough is necessarily like a bedtime story book for kids, but like maybe parts of it. I don't know. And so I'm really thankful that the work I've put out there has reached a lot of different types of people for sure.
Speaking of kids, as I was reading through the book, especially the with rice section, I just kept thinking like, oh, we're going to make all of these.
Yeah.
And serve them to our kids.
Yeah.
Because one, we're very bad at cooking for our kids. But two, a thing that has come up a few times on the show and is like particularly a theme for me is I grew up mostly having takeout Chinese. So no one in my house really cooked Chinese food at home. And so it's been very intimidating for me and just not knowing like where to start, not wanting to get it wrong, and just kind of, like I can look things up on the internet and the recipes.
Yeah.
Who knows? But
Yeah.
one, you feel like a trusted source, and two, they're written in a way that is like very accessible to me for whatever reason. Kudos to you, I guess.
I think it's my Midwesternness. I like to like be as direct as possible and not have too many like superfluous like ingredients or like wordage, like I'm just like, this is what you need, the bare minimum to make it great. Here are some extra things. If you want it, you don't have to. And here are the steps to make a really good dinner.
I mean, I'm super into it because I did look at, I forget what things, all of them, but a couple where I was like, that's it? That's not a lot. I have all those things now. I just, okay.
That could have been the alternative title to the book. That's it? Question mark. Like that's all instead of that's it! Exclamation mark.
But like, I really appreciate that because,
Yeah.
I think when I think about Chinese cooking, because I think a lot about restaurant food, it always feels like many ingredients, many steps, a lot of prep, a lot of things that just like a big walk, things that like feel too intimidating or I just don't have the time or energy for. But in seeing your ingredient lists and like reading through the recipes, I was like, oh, wait, I could actually do this.
Yeah.
My kids might actually eat Chinese food that I make, not just that Sam sometimes makes.
Yeah. I think like you mentioned earlier that there's like a fear of not making it right, not giving the recipe its like full justice when you make it, and I read about that idea a little bit. I have like a spread about like Lunar New Year traditions about how like I used to have this like fear of not celebrating correctly, like doing something that will bring me bad luck for 8 years or something like that. Like I always had this like fear that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna cut my hair too early. My life is ruined. But I just sort of like let that go. And I feel like the attempt of celebrating and that applies to cooking too, like the attempt of trying to make the food that you love, that your family loves, your kids love is better than not trying at all, and you don't always have to get it like perfectly right the first time. Like recipes are meant to like adapt and grow. I actually think that like a majority of the recipes in my cookbook, and also I think like most cookbooks should have this philosophy too, that like they should still taste good, even if you're like missing like one little thing, I guess, like, oh, if you don't have celery, use broccoli stems, like have the flexibility of like still making like a good dish without having everything at like 100% perfection.
That really rubs up against my hyper-achieving perfectionist.
I
Asian
am the same
upbringing.
way too. Like, yeah, totally. I'm the same way too. But I had to just like let it go.
Yeah,
like,
no, I do appreciate that.
Yeah,
and the idea that even if you're missing something from a recipe and it's not like fundamental, it should still taste good. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like a joke now. Like when you post a recipe that is so simple, like tomato egg or whatever, and then someone comments like, oh, what if I don't like tomatoes? Like that scenario is probably where like you need the tomatoes.
Right.
But if you have too many tomatoes, it's not a big deal. Or if you don't have like the right tomatoes, it should still taste good.
Then just eat your scrambled eggs?
Yeah, like just eat scrambled eggs and ketchup. I guess. Just also good.
Yeah, that's just called eggs and rice. It's a different dish entirely. I do want to jump around a little bit. when you first posted you unboxing your book, basically, I was like very carefully zooming in. And the thing that jumped out a lot, aside from everything, is your final chapter called I Love You, Here's Some Fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it so much that actually when I was reading the PDF, I went to that page first just because I was like, what does she have to say about this? And it's like nothing new that we haven't said on the show, but like seeing it in print was like very affirming. And also like it is the culture of just can't say I'm sorry, plate of fruit. Can't say I love you, plate of fruit. Love language, cut fruit.
Yeah. At first I was maybe a little nervous that it plays into a little bit of like a tropiness of how like in Asian culture, like fruit is a love language. But I think even the fact that people might find it to be a trope doesn't make it any less true.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like especially in my family, I think I just wanted an opportunity to kind of expand it a little bit more. You know, it's like more than your mom cutting you a mango or an orange after you got into like a spat or something. Like there are moments of more joyful moments with fruit. Like I wrote about how like I asked my grandma when they first moved to the United States, what was grocery shopping like? It was hard for sure. Like there weren't many options in downtown Cleveland. I think at the time they had like one market established that had like rarely anything. But also at the same time, like my family was incredibly poor when they first moved to the United States. So they did not have much money to spend on any type of luxuries or sweets or delights. You know, like I think we live in a culture now that's like, oh, sweet treat. I'm just going to go spend $5 on something, which is, again, so grateful that you can do that. But I remember my mom said, like, yeah, like we could really only afford oranges. Oranges were like the only fruit that was available to them. But when my grandpa would go to the market and there was like a sale on plums or cherries, I actually thought about it recently because I was at Berkeley Bowl and they had, it's so hard to find, but these black plums, the black plums that have like the dark skin, but the interior is like a bright orange.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why those are so hard to find for me. Like, I think because maybe there's
not just you.
Yeah, those are my.
I haven't seen them in a long time. Yeah,
they're like my favorite, and I should have bought more. I bought like two because I was trying to like conserve myself because I tend to overbuy stuff. Anyway, so I bought like two, and I like bit into it, and it just reminded me of like this like really fuzzy memory when I was a kid at my grandparents' house, and it was like summertime. And my grandparents didn't have AC except for like one box unit. And it was just like really hot. And my grandpa came in with like a big bag of these like black plums. And I remember he was so proud. And he was like, you know how like parents are like, I got this for like $2, you know, like they were like that they were like so excited to share like the deal that they got on it, you know? So I wrote a little bit about that in the intro of the book about how like fruit is also just like a moment of a really simple joy that for some reason Asian people, and I'm sure like all different other cultures too, also share it, but like just really good fruit is a moment to celebrate, you know. And also here are a couple of the recipes that you can just use fresh fruit in and add a little sweet moment to your day.
Sort of related. I said to Sam the other day that I feel like I'm finally aging into a certain level of Chinese mom because things are too sweet for me now. And I feel like fruit like really kind of fits into that bucket of like not too sweet, sweet enough, and whatever is seasonal is like kind of always going to hit that. And so like that's maybe, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've also been peeling a lot of mangoes lately, and so I'm like checking a lot of Asian mom boxes.
Yeah.
I'm kind of happy about it.
I feel like whenever you almost acquire a skill that reminds you of your mom or your grandma, you're like, oh, one step closer to becoming like Pawpaw status or something like that, you know? Like, so I catch myself doing that too, for sure.
I really love that the whole book you say Pawpaw and Gong Gong.
It's interesting. Thank you. That is just what I call my grandparents. The word Pawpaw or the name Pawpaw actually has a few different kind of memory associations for me. Like some more recent. So obviously it's what I call my maternal grandma. But after Mooncakes and Milk Bread, I don't really read Amazon reviews just for my own sanity,
mental
you know,
health.
like not care. My dad does tell me that I'm still at 5 stars though. So like my dad on the other hand will read all of them. And he will only tell me like specific things, you know, and he told me about one that he was just like, I don't understand. One of the reviews, it was about my use of the Chinese language, which again kind of like made me feel sensitive about it being someone who's not like 100% fluent in Cantonese, especially Chinese characters and stuff. And the person said that, oh, I wish there was an editor that kind of reviewed the use of like Chinese languages and stuff. And I'm like, part of it, I'm like, fair, that would have been nice, I guess. But then they also said like, no one calls their grandma Papa. And I'm like, what? Like, what is strange? They're like, I grew up in Hong Kong and whatever. And like, I've never heard of anyone calling their grandma Papa. And I was just like, wow, that is another memory that I will insert to my long list of people assuming that I am less than because of small details of my life that feel very real to me, and that was a very sensitive one to me, because it's literally just like what I and all my other cousins call my grandma. And I just wanted to say, like, there's so many ways to call your grandma something, like the different like dialects of Chinese. You can say popo or like whatever, like there are so many different ways to say it. And when my dad told me about that, it brought me a flashback. And I ended up writing about it in the introduction of my book about how when I was really little in English class, he'd go around like popcorn reading and you're like reading a segment out of a book. I was reading a segment that should have said, I think, Papa, like your dad or whatever, or your grandpa. And I ended up saying Paul with like my Toisan dialect or whatever.
Mhm.
And everyone's like, what? Like, it was another exact same scenario. Everyone's like, what did you say? My teacher, I was like, oh, like, sorry, and like, I remember as a kid freezing and like feeling like, oh, that was bad. Like, I should not have said that because I was different than everyone else. I said something different, and like, that was one of the earliest memories that I remember hiding away a little piece of myself, just as like a little aside to like the fact that you like that I referred to my grandparents as Gong Gong and Papa. It could be so simple, but like, again, being Chinese American, whatever, there's like so many moments that can feel so much more complex, as simple as just what you call your grandparents.
For me, it was always, how do I spell it? Which is still a question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I went with PAU because I feel like PAW just didn't sound right to me. And POPO also doesn't sound right to me. So
yes. So we go with POPO knowing
Yeah.
that it is like, that is not correct, but
Mhm.
somehow we landed here.
It might need like one of those like signs over the O or something.
Yeah, maybe. PAW sounds like to me, like a southern grandfather
Like
situation.
my papa.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess what I love about it, though, is there are other books, media, whatever, where like it would have been said one time and then it would have said like grandmother, or it would have said grandmother and then like papa would have been in parentheses, and then you would have moved on and it would have been grandmother forever. And yours goes entirely the other way. And I like that. It's great.
Yeah. I use papa and gong gong, and then I think maybe the first couple of times I'll say grandpa or grandma, and let's assume that like you'll just remember this for the rest of the book. So no.
But I like that because, again, these are the little moments of representation that matter, and the ones that I think, for me growing up, I grew up going to a Chinese immersion school. And so like in that scenario, it was fine to say like Papa and Gong Gong because we were supposed to. But outside of that context, it was like, oh, when I tell other people who they are, I would like switch and be like, my grandpa, my grandma, my Gma, whatever, because I didn't know how it would be received. And I didn't want to explain it. And, having even just one more book that uses terms consistently is like a step in that direction. And someone else being like, ah, yes, me also.
Yeah, it's like a friendly reminder that like, oh, there's at least one other person out there. And in reality, there's millions more that like understand what you're saying.
Hard pivot.
Yeah.
What's your favorite recipe in the book?
That's such a hard question. Okay. So I just made these 2 days ago. So my answer is just going to constantly change depending on like what I just ate or like what I just had.
Yeah.
But in the dessert chapter, in the last chapter, there are these raspberry white rabbit cookies that are phenomenal. It's the only cookie in the book, and it's the only cookie that matters, other than my grandpa's almond cookies or my Gong Gong's almond cookies in my first book. But this is the second book, so it's like we're in a whole new world here.
Yeah.
But I just made those a few days ago, and I always forget just how incredible they are. They have white rabbit candies, which I'm sure that you have had growing up. I don't want to assume, but like they're like the little, they almost look like Tootsie Rolls, but they're milk. They're creamy, sweet and condensed milk flavored little candies. So the cookie is like almost like a chocolate chip cookie, but instead of chocolate chips, there's pieces of like melty white rabbit candy in it. And there's fresh raspberries in there for like a bright tartness contrast. And the cookie dough base has like brown butter in it. And so there's a lot of, I like to say that these are like an everything cookie because they're like sweet, they're salty, they're thin and crispy, but with like a soft, gooey center. And then they're like also fruity. They're just such a perfect cookie. And I think everyone should make them.
We will.
Yeah.
How did you come up with this?
I don't know. It's been so long. So like, just to explain my recipe development process, it's a little strange, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how other people do it, but I have this running notes app on my phone that just has recipe ideas and it goes back years at this point. I end up dividing it out to like different years so that I can at least keep track of like trends or like what I'm interested in the year. Anyways, so a lot of times my recipe ideas aren't fully fleshed out. Sometimes they're like brown butter, raspberries, candy. You know, like it's just like I like how those things sound together or taste together. Or a few months ago, I made this like oolong orange bun, and I just wrote down orange and oolong because I just thought that that name sounded really beautiful together, and I also imagined that the flavors would taste really good together, and they did. So sometimes it's like words, or like I have like a visual, like I want a cookie that has like melty strands of candy rather than like that remind me of marshmallows, but they're not marshmallows, you know? So I get recipe ideas all the time. It's really easy for me to just come up with an idea. And then the next step is like testing it to see if it actually becomes something that will taste good. And so I'm sure that that's where that cookie came from. And I mentioned it's the only cookie recipe in the book because the one parameter that I wanted in every recipe in the dessert chapter was obviously fruit, because that was the main focus, how to utilize fresh fruit. And making a cookie with fresh fruit can be kind of hard unless you're turning the fruit into like a jam or something like that. And I wanted to keep the raspberries whole. They break up a little bit in the dough, but just like some cookie science, like the reason why I went with brown butter in the cookie dough is because when you're browning butter, you're actually evaporating and cooking out the water content that's in your butter. So that what's left over is like the butter fat and the milk solids. And so when you do that, typically in a brown butter cookie, your dough could be a little dry. But in this case, it was perfect because it balanced out the moisture that you get from fresh fruit. Like raspberries have a ton of like just natural water in it, you know? And so like if you have too much water or moisture in your cookie, you get a cakey, kind of like puffy cookie. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted like a thin, kind of crispy, chewy cookie. And so that's how like the brown butter worked its way in with the raspberries and the white rabbit. I wanted that component in there because it was such like a nostalgic childhood candy. And I was almost creating this cookie as like the cookie that I would have loved as a kid, you know, my dream childhood cookie. So
Nice.
that's kind of long-winded answer about how I created that cookie recipe.
No, I love it. It reminded me, not related, but kind of, that a coworker brought in different kinds of white rabbit candy. So it was the first time I had like a corn one, coffee.
Oh, I've never tried any of them before.
I was sort of like, well, let's do one of everything.
Yeah. How was the texture of them? Like, I've asked a few people this. When I was a kid, I remember the white rabbit candies being much softer initially. Like they were maybe a little bit closer to like, not quite as soft as like a Tootsie Roll, but they were soft still. So that like immediately unwrapping it, put it in your mouth, you can like chew on it or whatever. Now they're so hard. You have to put them in your mouth and like kind of like let them soften for like a minute or something before you can like chew on them. And I think I did some research a long time ago how like they really did change the recipe at some point and how the texture is off. So I'm curious if you have that same memory.
Oh, interesting. I didn't eat them a ton as a kid, but I do remember them being softer, and now they are certainly not Tootsie Roll soft.
Yeah, absolutely not. Nope.
It was a like, let me just hamster this one in my cheek for a little bit while it softens up, and then I'll move on to enjoy it. There were some other coworkers that are like, oh, those are so hard. And I was like, well, the fresher they are, they're actually a little bit softer. And these were pretty
Mhm.
fresh.
Okay.
So it was fine for me. Like it was as expected and I, kind of knew what I was getting and I was in for it. But yeah, it wasn't like an immediate sort of like, let's chew into this. Like there was
Mhm.
a waiting period.
Mhm. Yeah.
Flavors were good.
Yeah. Corn sounds interesting.
I have memories of it being both chewy and hard. And
Okay.
I remember eating it in the winter time and like having it get really cold in my
Oh,
pocket
okay.
outside.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you are a fan of Costco.
Yes. Yes.
I'm just wondering, have you ever tried the White Rabbit popsicles that they had at one point?
The freezer section is a place that I try my hardest to avoid.
Hmm.
Only because there's so many amazing things that I want to buy, but my
Mm.
freezer is quite small and it's already filled with like frozen dumplings and just like various science experiments or just like recipe tests and stuff.
Yeah.
But I see them. I definitely see them. And I have never tried one before. I want someone
Yeah.
else to buy it so that I can just take one and try it. But are they good? Have you tried them?
I haven't tried it, but I've heard good things about them.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
Do we need like a Costco White Rabbit popsicle tasting party when they come back?
That would be amazing. Yes. I actually would love an all Asian frozen dessert popsicle tasting thing.
Hmm.
Like all the Malona bars, you can even throw in some its in there just because we're in
San
the Bay
Francisco,
Area.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
It's funny that you say Malona because super specific, super right now, but we've been watching the Olympics and for some
Uh-huh.
reason there's a lot of Malona commercials.
Really
Yes. I don't
interesting.
it's
Okay.
one commercial that they play many times. But to my mind, they are like more Asian market, but the commercial is very white. And I was like, "What is this? Am I misremembering something? Like, is this my own sort of cultural Berenstein moment where like I don't know what they are?"
Yeah, I guess they're trying to like reach like a new demographic. It's almost like the opposite of like I feel like I saw a commercial for a paper towel brand and it was like an Asian family like eating dumplings and like the
Oh.
dumplings slipped out of the chopsticks and it was like up in the air and then like their pawpaw was grabbing like a paper towel and was like trying to catch it before I was just like, what is this? Like it's like the opposite, like they're just trying
Yeah,
to reach a different demographic.
that's kind of hilarious. Also, we just have cloths for that. It wouldn't be a paper towel.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't waste the paper towels on that.
Mm-mm. I ugh. I want to talk about the whole book. I really do. We can't. We won't. Here's the thing, right? Like, you're about to do a bunch of press. You're about to go on book tours. People are going to
Uh-huh.
ask you a ton of questions. What's the thing that they're not going to ask you that you want to say?
That's a good question. Um, there could be a lot of things. I think one question would be like how to use this book.
Mm.
I tried to explain it as best as I could without being like, this is exactly how you need to use the book. I don't like telling people what to do. A lot of different things inspired me to write this book. There wasn't just like one sole memory or event, but I did have this really memorable dinner at my parents' house. It was like December 2020. So my husband and I had just road tripped across the country. We were like avoiding all other people, all we quarantined before seeing my parents and stuff. And we had a little bit of miscommunication about where we were having dinner. My parents thought that they were coming over to my Airbnb, which was like in downtown Cleveland somewhere. I thought we were going to my parents' house. I showed up at my parents' house and the lights were off. No one was in there. It was completely dark. I called my parents and they're like, "Oh, we're almost at the Airbnb." I'm like, "What are you talking about? We're having dinner at your place." And we're like, kind of laughed about it. And then I was like, "Oh, like, should I just order us a pizza?" For my parents' house. And my mom and dad were like, "Nope, don't worry about it. Like, we'll just cook something, you know." And I was like, okay. Like it's like already, it's like kind of late, like we're hungry. So my parents drive back and then they whip out like a 4 course dinner for like the 4 of us in a very, I would say, very typical like Asian style of dinner, where it's not just like a one pot recipe, which sometimes my mom will do that, but like my mom made a big batch of tomato egg she made a soup, like a Chinese soup with like bean curd and winter melon that she already had in the fridge and like bits of frozen pork. She also made this black bean and garlic stir fried squid with squid that she had in her freezer, and like bell peppers. And then she made rice and maybe one other thing. I don't remember. But I was like it was nothing, like they just like whipped this up. And both my parents were cooking, and I just remember thinking like it had been a while because it had been like over a year since I'd been to my parents' house because of quarantine and traveling and stuff like that. And I just like forgot, like, this is how I grew up eating, having these different dishes that are simple and you feel like you can just make them at any time because you've integrated these recipes into your life. Like you started stocking dried bean stick or bean curd in your pantry, like you utilize frozen seafood, because it's just as good as like the fresh fancy stuff you get at your like fancy seafood market. There's no problem with the frozen stuff. You make a batch of black bean garlic sauce every couple weeks so you keep it fresh in your fridge for quick stir fries. Like these recipes have become a part of your life and you feel like you can just make them, or make some semblance of them at any given time so that when you have family over, you could like just like make dinner instead of ordering pizza. And while there is a time to order pizza, but there also is a time for you just to like cook like it's not a big deal, And I think that level of cooking is maybe something I can do it. And I think as I get older, I get closer and closer to like my mom's level, my grandma's level of just like my grandma can just like make like a 10-course dinner. She's in her 90s now, so she's like a little slower, but like in her prime, pawpawness, like she was making like a lot of food in like a short period of time to feed our entire family. But I just think of that when I imagine like a classic Chinese for me type of meal, like, in my grandparents' kitchen in Cleveland, it has all these different plates, all these little things that you want to grab like a little piece of and compose like your perfect plate. And with the book, you have the option of just making one thing if you want to. If you just want to make the San Francisco garlic noodles and just eat that, totally fine, But ultimately, the way that the book should be working is that you kind of pick and choose these different recipes that sound great to you and mix and match them to compose this like really wonderful, robust, and also dynamic meal that comes together relatively easy, I think. I'm not going to lie and say that cooking is like the easiest thing ever and it's like not stressful, like of course it is sometimes, but I think if you pick and choose like the right recipes or the ones that just like really feel like they fit you and fit your lifestyle, you can make these like really dynamic meals kind of often. I did not really write about it. I wanted to write this essay about like not everything needs to be a dinner party. I think I maybe wrote 2 sentences in one of the essays or front matter pages about how, as much as I love a dinner party, like making it cute and have a composed menu, some of the best feasts, like lots of different types of food, were thrown by my family. And if I asked them if they've ever thrown a dinner party before, they would say no. Like they would have no idea. And so I think that there should be this like kind of mind shift that like feeding your friends and your family a really good meal doesn't only need to be reserved for like the perfect moments that like you have all the candles and like all the linens and like whatever, it can just be like Thursday night because that's when everyone's free and you're coming over. You can make a big dinner together. I think that feeling is rooted in my childhood and it's something I'm like constantly chasing in my life, like being able to kind of like recreate those like really cozy meals that just like serendipitously happen. So, yeah.
That's so beautiful. I loved all of that.
Thanks. I hope I answered that question. I really
totally did.
I talked for a long time. Sorry.
No. I mean, I'm sure we could talk about probably every page of this book and we would be here for 6 days and it would be very enjoyable because there was not a page that I read where I didn't have like a little grin about something. But specifically at the end, in talking about like how to use the book and the meal sets and things like that, you do have a cute little spread that's like meals for 2, meals for 4, meals for 8. And I saw it first and then I told Sam about it and I was like, this reminds me of, still to this day, but especially my childhood, where we would go for whether it was like our Chinese New Year opening dinner or someone's birthday, and we would like look at what the set was, and it'd
Mhm.
be like, oh, okay, well, there's 10 of us, but we don't like all the stuff on the set menu for 10, so we'll get the set
Mhm.
menu for 6, and then we'll like add these
Yeah.
4 favorites or whatever,
Mhm.
or something like that. And it was just like such this
Totally.
like
It's all strategy.
it's totally strategy.
Yeah.
It was such like a nostalgic moment for me that I like forgot that we had done that. So it was really nice to
Mhm.
see it in the book. But like, yes, it is 100% strategy, because like I remember it would be like, well, no one's really going to eat the lobster off the big one, so like we'll get the smaller thing.
Yeah.
Or this one has
Mhm.
this, but it doesn't have whatever, and just sort of like, okay, but we can't mix and match. And so, and
Mhm.
then having
Yeah.
one person be in charge of remembering all that.
Yeah, for sure. That in my family, that was like always my mom. Like I remember her looking at the set menus and saying all that exact same stuff. Like, oh, this one comes with the crab claw in the shrimp ball
Hmm.
or whatever it's called. I don't know the actual name. But like I don't want this thing, so we'll just get this section and add this vegetable and like whatever.
Hmm.
So it's all strategy.
Was your family's Chinese restaurant that style?
It could have been. So it was like a sit down restaurant. So it was like a relatively big restaurant. It was definitely like Chinese American food, but then they also had like the extra special real Chinese menu, I guess they would call it.
Hmm.
They called it like the banquet room that you could have like if you wanted like a dinner for 20, 30 people, you could like
Mm.
rent this room in the back to have your dinner in and stuff like that. We would go to another restaurant often for like more of like the classic banquet style food, I would say.
Tell me more about what your grandparents' restaurant was like.
So my grandparents had three restaurants over the course of their career. In the last, I guess, like iteration of one, it was called Taipan. My grandpa opened it in the suburb that my parents decided
Mm.
to move to. And I went to it essentially from the time I was like born. I have family friends that remember seeing me at the restaurant, like in a little, I don't know what you call it, like a little bassinet or like a little high, like a
Mm.
little, like my little carrier. So I was there essentially until I was born, from the time I was born until I was like 10 or 11. And looking back on it, I had just really positive memories. Like I remember, especially during like, I think in between shifts when the restaurant was quieter. Like I remember like playing catch with my uncle, like along like the one long stretch of like banquettes because that was like the longest like clear path that you had. I would sit at like the bar, and my mom was occasionally like the bartender. Like she didn't work there full time. She worked at a hospital full time, and then she would come after work also to watch my brother and I, but she would also just like pitch in anywhere that was needed. So she was like a bartender. She was occasionally like a hostess, a waitress, like a carryout runner. But like I would sit at the bar and she was the bartender and she would make me Shirley Temples. And like I learned how to fly kites with my gong gong in the back. Like, so there's a lot of like really like beautiful and like really joyful childhood memories I have there. I had a conversation with my dad a couple years ago. I was just kind of talking to him more about the restaurant, and stuff. And he acknowledged the fact that I have a lot of really positive memories about the restaurant, but he wanted to kind of like, he didn't say it in a negative way. He was just like, I want you to be aware that it was also really hard for your grandparents. And so that is something I have been trying to be more conscious of. Like it's very easy for me to romanticize my childhood growing up in a Chinese American restaurant. I actually did a podcast a few weeks ago that is all about Chinese takeaway kids
Oh,
and about their experiences. It's not out yet, but I'll let you know about it. But
yeah.
that was actually a really interesting conversation that I had with her. And I again talked about all those like really happy, wonderful memories and like things I learned there. But then it kind of got me thinking about like my dad told me some like more difficult stuff about, well, one, it's a known fact that owning a restaurant is really difficult. The margins are
Hmm.
small, especially being a immigrant business owner in a mostly white area,
Hmm.
Cleveland suburbs. And so it was hard, but my grandpa did it for most of his entire career in the United States. And I think that's a success in itself. But I remember there was like people that would dine and dash. There were people who would call into the health department and they would lie and say that we had dogs in the back that they
Oh,
were serving, and that kind of broke my heart a little bit. And I remember now this memory of like when I was a kid, this man coming into the restaurant and everyone being very like maybe stressed about it, like what's he doing here? And like I asked my dad about that. He was like, that was like the health inspector that was coming to like look around, because people, it was like dumb kids or dumb adults that were calling in and making lies about this restaurant. And there was definitely a lot of challenges that I was shielded from and didn't have to experience, but it was a very much a reality for people like my grandparents and even my mom, my aunts and uncles that were there helping them run this restaurant. So overall, I would not change my growing up in the restaurant at all. I think just like moving forward, I am trying to kind of like fully understand like what this experience was for everybody involved.
I think what comes up for me is just thinking about how, as we talk to people on the show, a lot of it is looking back and seeing like, what do I know now that I didn't know then or I didn't realize? And some of it is how hard things were. And some of it is actually like more grace for the people at the time. I am only more recently thinking about how like my own perspective's changing and like what that means for me as an adult human.
Yeah.
And then how, we have kids, like how we parent and like what they might think now that they won't think later.
Yeah, exactly. It just puts a lot of things in perspective and like, not to like tie in the book again, like, but like, I feel like a lot of those conversations that I was having about the restaurant with like my dad, and my mom and my grandma, like I think I kind of brought it up. I was like, oh, like I'm trying to understand more because I'm like writing this book. And I feel like writing Chinese enough was like part of the process of feeling Chinese enough, if that makes any sense, like cooking this food and having food be a part of my family's literal history has been a way of me being able to get to know them even more. I think if I wasn't a cookbook author, I don't know how easy these conversations would have been brought up. I think about that like, oh, like if I wasn't literally writing a book about like childhood traumas or difficulties growing up, would I have brought it up? Would I have asked my dad how hard it was to like own this restaurant, or like when I tried to figure out the details of a recipe that my papa has been making since she was a child. If I wasn't a cookbook author or if I didn't care so much about food, would I have ever found out about her experience learning how to make these recipes when she was a child over 80 years ago and learning about how hard her life was back then, And so I think that is the really powerful thing about like food and cooking. Obviously, it just like it allows people in our community to just find it easier to talk to each other and relate to each other. It's hard. It doesn't like come natural, I don't think. Like I think that there's a lot of like barriers to kind of get to the meat of how were you feeling during this time. Getting there is really difficult, but for some reason when you when you talk about the context of it, like with food or something like that, just makes it a little bit more achievable.
Oh, that's so great. I love it. We could talk forever. I mean that wholeheartedly. There's literally nothing in this book that I don't have comments or questions or like just big, deep sighs about because I love it so much.
Thanks.
I told my coworker this book is very huggable. My preferred method of falling asleep is like holding a book for whatever reason. And this book definitely falls into the huggable category.
That's awesome. I can't wait till you get like a physical book so you can like actually hug it. So,
I mean, speaking of listeners, the book is available for pre-order today. I have pre-ordered already. I'm very excited. Kristina has, I think, a special little offer if you pre-order ahead of time and you get like a wonton making class with you. Is that right?
Yeah, you get like a virtual wonton making class with me. And then you also get 3 recipes early that you can make now. I have a link on my website and on my Instagram, pretty much wherever, for you to kind of claim your bonuses. All you need to do is just submit like a receipt from whoever you ordered the book from. It doesn't really matter. Let's see. So you get recipes for chashu mushrooms, which are super, super good. It utilizes like extra large portobello mushrooms or big shiitake mushrooms, and you baste them while grilling the whole cap with this like chashu sauce, and it gets like crispy and caramelized, and it's super good. I imagine it would taste amazing like between 2 buns, like as like a kind of vegetarian version of a chashu pork chop sandwich,
Ooh,
so
yes.
super, super good, really meaty. And then another recipe is orange pepper popcorn chicken that's inspired by kind of like Taiwanese popcorn chicken and also karaage. It's like the closest thing I have to orange chicken in the book without actually doing orange chicken. And that's also super yummy. And then the wontons too. It's like my favorite summer wonton. The filling is like corn, chicken, basil, and jalapenos. And then you have two options. You can either toss it in this like miso butter sauce or serve it in a tomato kombu broth, like a summery wonton soup.
Yum.
So you can cook all that now.
Yeah. I did look at that recipe and I was like, I will make this one for me.
Yes.
I don't care about the children.
They might like it.
I think we just have to check the spice levels and then they'll be into it.
Oh, I would just like omit the jalapeno. I also feel like jalapenos just like aren't spicy anymore. I feel like I read something about that, how they're like genetically modifying them to be just less spicy. And I'm like, what's the point?
Honestly, that tracks because I just had a slice of pizza. It was like a special out of sight. Hey. And it was like a lemon ricotta candied jalapeno. And someone was like, oh, too spicy. And I was like, no, not spicy at all. Delicious. But now that you mention it, those jalapenos were not spicy in any way.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever I see a recipe where they ask you to like remove the seeds and like the membrane, I'm always like, what's the point? Like you're like removing the spiciness. Like you should just bought a green bell pepper. I don't.
It's not wrong.
So, anyways, that's my hot take.
No, I like it. Okay, where can people find you so that they can order this book?
You can find me on my website, eatrofood.com, that has older recipes and then a lot of information about my book, my future book tour, which I haven't announced yet, but I'm really close to. Maybe by the time this airs, it will be out. And then my Instagram and TikTok are both under Eat Show Food. And then I also have a Substack that's called Have You Eaten Yet, which is actually where I share all new recipes. I just find it kind of fun and it's like an intimate way to kind of connect to readers. And that's where I've been sharing all my new recipes lately. So you can find it there. Have You Eaten Yet?
Amazing. Everybody, seriously, go pre-order this book, especially if you are even remotely a little bit Chinese or just curious, or definitely if you grew up in San Francisco and know anything about the Inner Richmond, it will feel like home. So glad that we could have you on. I'm so glad we got to have this conversation. When we first started this podcast, and even before it was a podcast, I wanted like a book that sort of like talked about all these stories. And as I was like reading Chinese enough, I was like, she did it. It's done.
Yeah.
She did the thing.
Yeah, exactly what I was looking for. So that means a lot.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
it's amazing. It's really great. I'm sure I will buy multiples and gift it at some point.
Thank you.
Kristina, thank you again for being here. So happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. This was such a fun discussion. Again, we keep saying we could be talking forever, but
we could. I mean,
really...
so you have an open door to come back anytime. Any new recipe, old recipe, future cookbook. I'm sure there will be more. Anytime.
Awesome.
Because we could talk forever. Also, we could meet at Good Luck Dim Sum.
Oh, yeah. That'd be fun.
And then do like big trays.
Yeah, we could do big trays. I was going to say we could do a field recording.
Yes.
Where we talk. Yeah, that'd be really fun.
Find Kristina, buy her book. It's great. Get her old book. It's not that old. Moon Cakes and Milk Bread. It's also very huggable. Hug them together when you get them. These are books that like I think our kids will actually learn recipes out of someday. And I feel really good about that because they're going to recognize stuff in it too.
Yeah. And they'll cook for you so you don't have to cook.
I mean, here's hoping.
That's a dream.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
We'll teach them now. Thank you again. Listeners at home, no recipe. Just go get the book. Seriously. I can't say it enough. If you would like to find us, you can find us at worstqualitycrab.com or Worst Quality Crab on Instagram. And if you want to email us for any reason, you can do so at worstqualitycrabpod@gmail.com. Otherwise, we will talk to you next time. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
We need a like Costco Asian stuff doesn't fit in your freezer party.
Yes, exactly. Like, oh, that should be a really fun party if everyone brought one thing and so you can like swap. Like,
yes,
you go home with like only 1 to 2 corn dogs.
Yeah, oh my God.
Then, like popsicles and like whatever, you know. But then you're still gonna have a lot of stuff. But at least it's like a medley.
Yeah, this is genius.
Yeah.
We have to make this happen. This is amazing.
Yeah, I actually really like that idea.
That's the best swag bag I've ever heard.
Yeah. Frozen
So
Asian
good.
food. That
Mhm.
comes in a cooler. You get like a
Mhm.
cooler. Yeah.
Ooh,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
a little branded cooler.
Those $3 Trader Joe's ones that people on the
Yes.
internet are going crazy over.
Yes. I'm resisting buying that as well. So-
Same. Also, mine is sold out. But
Okay. Mine probably is too.